And what else do I know? And about the haunted coach at St. David's Church.
So that's 3 wonderful stories that we can do. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
So I think what we're going to do, this is meant to be a storytelling evening, and you can't get any better than me telling a story out of a book. Now this is a book that you're not going to be able to get hold of. And one thing in life is knowledge, and the acquisition of books that nobody else can get hold of is a very useful trick, isn't it, Amy?
Mm-hmm.
So what do we know about the Maid of Kevin Idver? So we're going to get straight into it. So what we have is a story. Kevin Idver is about 6 miles to the north of Bridgend, and in the parish of Llangffordd. Now I've been up to Llangffordd a number of times, and I've actually been to the place where the story of the Maid of Kevin Idver actually takes place at. So here we go. Let's get straight into this. The location associated with Thomas Morgan, a farmhouse, and it goes on. It was occupied in 1700 by a certain William Thomas, whose only daughter Anne, subsequently known as the Maid of Kevin Idver, who was born in 1704, was left an orphan, an heiress to her father, who died in 1706. Miss Thomas became acquainted with William, commonly called Will Hopkin, who, though only a tiler and plaster, was considered an excellent bard. And for those that don't know what a bard is a storyteller. So a romantic attachment arose between Miss Thomas and the bard William Hopkin, and ripened into a deep and passionate love, which ultimately ended in the insanity and premature death of the young lady, otherwise known as the Maid of Kevin Idver. So I think what we need to look at is a little bit about the background. It's a very short story, actually. When the young lady's feelings became known, her mother and the family tried to break off the connection between the rich heiress and the poor plasterer. You couldn't marry beneath you back then. Who afterwards made clandestine meetings in the woods. These secret meetings were discovered, and Miss Thomas was kept prisoner in a room. And if any of you have ever been to the farmhouse at Kevin Idver, you'll know that there's a very eerie silence around the landscape there. A certain Anthony Maddock sought the heiress's hand in marriage, but was refused. The Maid of Kevin Idver was deeply in love with Will Hopkins. Her letters to Will Hopkins, because they wished to carry on the relationship, were placed into a hollow tree in the woods, and the bard's letters were also placed in there. So what we're talking about is, as she was unable to meet her boyfriend, the letters were placed in a tree, and the servant of the Maid of Kevin Idver would take her letters to the tree and would then collect the letters from Will Hopkins and hand them over to the Maid of Kevin Idver. This was later on discovered, and then writing materials were taken away from her, and she was not allowed to write letters to Will Hopkins anymore. She was given an ultimatum, and she was told she had to marry Anthony Maddock, who was a very rich gentleman indeed. When every means of communication with the bard had failed, Miss Thomas is said to have written to him on a sycamore leaf with a pin dipped in her own blood. So she had all her pens and writing material taken away, and she had to write letters on sycamore leaves in her own blood. And then apparently she had put them on the windowsill, and they were blown out by the winds, and then Will Hopkins collected them. Ultimately, in 1725, she had to marry somebody that she was not in love with. She was in fact in love with Will Hopkin. She had to marry Mr. Maddock. Their married life was short and tragically painful one. The young wife became insane, and her cries for the one who she loved went into the wind to Will Hopkins, and she went mad. And then a peculiar thing happened. It was a strange little incident. A peculiar incident happened connected with her death on June the 16th, 1725. Will Hopkin, after the marriage of the lady henceforth known as the Maid of Kevin, there he dreamt that Maddock was dead. So impressed was he with the dream that he returned to Kevin Idva to find the husband still alive and the wife in the pangs of insanity. Will Hopkins still loved the maid of Kevin Idva. The doctor advised Mr. Maddock to send for the bard in order, if possible, to allay the mental agony and fearful cries of the ill-fated sufferer from a room. Every night she cried out. This was done, and as soon as Will entered her room, the young lady sprang towards him and became quite calm. But in a few hours' time, she died peacefully in his arms. The house where the maid lived is said to be haunted by a spirit. And although at the present time it has been offered rent-free, people will not live in it. The last to live there was disturbed by noises and strange apparitions. Will Hopkins lived 14 years after the death of the maid of Kevin Idva, but he never married, and he died of a broken heart. So if you ever go to where the maid of Kevin Idva, the farmhouse there, it is actually lived in by somebody now. This story is written down over 120 years ago of the life and times of the maid of Kevin Idva. It's a very sad story indeed, and a ghost is said to haunt the landscape there, and you get a feeling of a ghost. So what I'm gonna say is I want a nice little story from Amy now to add to that. So can you take us up to the mines, Amy? Up
Yes,
there.
of course.
What I would like you to do is describe the landscape and what the landscape is like, and I want you to tell us about the haunted landscape. That just one of the stories. That's what I want you to tell us now.
Well, first of all, I just have to look out the window there, and there's the landscape if you wanted to see that. But the
Amy,
landscape here is very mountainous. Mountain. Carl?
hey, Amy, there's something wrong with your mic. Amy,
There's something wrong with the mic. Is that better?
yeah,
Yeah.
if you just keep still and you talk, that'll be fine. Keep going. Yeah.
Maesteg is a very mountainous area. From my point of view, where I live, it literally looks like a bowl. It looks like I live in a bowl, you know. The mines were all located on the mountains. It's very green, a lovely little community, and it was a mining community to the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. My grandfather actually used to work down the mines there. But he never really mentioned like anything that went on down there really, and unfortunately I wouldn't be able to ask him now because he has Alzheimer's and everything. But away from that, my grandmother actually said that she knew the miners that saw the devil on the mountains, and the mountainside is also said to be haunted by headless horsemen.
Tell us a little bit more.
Okay, so when it comes to the story about the devil on the mountain, is that there were miners playing cards during their break, and a man comes up to them and wants to play cards. So, you know, they say, yeah, you can play cards. And as this man keeps winning hands, and he just keeps winning and winning, not even like letting the players win. But a few hours go by and they realize that this guy has cloven feet. And they see him, they realize what he is or who he is, and he runs. He runs, they run, because they realize it's the devil. But my grandmother apparently knew those men, but I doubt it.
Do you know what? Do you know what? You've heard this little next story before. We've got exactly the same story with Land Mace.
Yes.
And it's that story that you know, we mentioned last week that lots of these little ghost stories are about warnings and
Yes.
Teaching people either not to be too greedy. And at Land Mace, we've got a very, very similar story of two gentlemen seeing this man in the field that you've so nicely described. And there's this table, and there's a cloth over this table, and the man sat alongside this table in the middle of the field. And you're thinking, why would two gentlemen go into the field, sit in these two chairs with a man who's playing cards? And the same story is that they realize this person's got cloven feet, and just before they get too dark, they run out of the field. You know, and that's a very, very familiar story that we're actually told. So one thing I'd like to do now is to sort of set up the landscape. You establish the landscape there with Maesteg, and it's always good to sort of try and drag in some other sort of little stories. And there are lots of stories that spring to mind. Is the idea that down in mines, when particularly with Cornish miners, it's that idea that when people are down in a mine and it's completely pitch black, there's nobody else around, things can still be heard. So when you get the creaking of the timber with the huge weights of the stone above, and you get those things being heard, and down underground with the reactions of the gases, you have strange noises of knocking. But then again, you do actually have ghostly apparitions, because in Wales we're very unfortunate in lots of ways to count that thousands of people have actually died underground, and their bodies have never ever been recovered. And those endless mine shafts are haunted by people who are endlessly walking through the mine tunnels to find some rest. And this is this wonderful haunted landscape that we talk about. And one thing that I do try and mention a great deal is the story of the Ceffyl Dwr, which is the water horse, which we mention a great deal on the walks, for example. And when we think about the Ceffyl Dwr, we think about this really mythical horse, and I say that in Wales we have the story associated with the Mari Lwyd, which is a figure of which is actually a proper horse's head, a skeletal horse's head, with somebody with a shroud over them, and they're operating that horse's head. Places like Llangffordd, places like Maesteg, places in that area, which actually kept hold of the Mari Lwyd tradition up until the end of the 1800s, into the 1900s. And Mari Lwyd wasn't there to scare people. It was there to, again, tell people a story of what we've lost in our traditions. And when we think about something like the Ceffyl Dwr, it's always be very wary when you the stories. It's very interesting when you look at the Ceffyl Dwr that within upland areas, where you've got boggy upland areas and you've got big pools and big ponds and watercourses and rivers, right? It's said that if you ever see a horse along a riverbank or a horse in the water, don't approach it. Because if you do approach it, the horse will try and drag you into the water or push you into the water. And there's actually a warning there. Don't go near the water's edge. Don't go near that pool. Because if you go near that pool, it might be a bog. It might be a big torrent of water. So keep away from the Ceffyl Dŵr. And when we've done ghost stories in the Vale of Glamorgan, we talk about St. Nicholas, which we'll be looking at in a few weeks' time, and we talk about Rice Merrick, a story about Rice Merrick, and we talk about a horse which is in a field, and a gentleman jumps on top of the horse, and so on and so on. So we've got all these wonderful stories associated with water and this wonderful mythical horse. And what I'd like to do is maybe the story of the Ceffyl Dŵr was a little bit sort of beyond some of our minds tonight, but I think the Maid of Sker would be a very interesting story to actually do, and maybe we should do the Maid of Sker now. But what I'd like to do is bring somebody else in on this, and I'd like to bring Del on this one. So Del, could you open your mic, please?
Okay, it's open.
Well, you're perfect for the Sker house, aren't you? Because you're very nearby.
Yes. Yeah, I know quite a bit about it.
So what I'd like to do, I'd like you to set the scene, and it's good to have somebody else to set the scene. So you know that landscape. What's that landscape like? Paint it for us.
Right. The house itself is on the edge of the shore. It's on the grassy bit, and then about I'd say 100 meters, you go onto the sand and the beach. It's quite isolated. In its heyday, it would have been really isolated. It's also on part of the old pilgrimage route from east to west. And it's set at the edge of a large area of sand dunes. So it's quite bleak, and it's not far from the old town of Kenfig, which is buried under the sands.
Lost in the sand dunes, exactly.
Lost.
And that is a very good description, because it paints the scene. So when we look at this, we've got the story of the Maid of Sker. And it's so good to go back to the sources, because, you can't get, when Mary Trevilian's actually writing down lots of these stories, she's actually, these stories are 120 years old when this book's 120 odd years old. So she's closer to these stories than we are. So when you read stories on the internet, people have always cut them down a little bit. So the Maid of Sker was the daughter of a Mr. Isaac Williams of Sker, which is an ancient farmhouse near Kenfig and about 3 miles from Porthcawl. She was born in the 1700s, and early in her schoolhood, she met a certain Thomas Evans, the harpist from Newton Nottage, which is also Porthcawl. He was a carpenter, but his musical abilities caused him to be in great request at the he basically was sent to various different places around the country. The young people fell in love. With each other. So in other words, the maid fell in love with the carpenter. But the parents could not give their consent to their daughter's marriage with the poor harpist. Miss Williams prepared to elope with a lover who brought a carriage and pair to the house late in the night. So in other words, he was gonna take her off and they were going to disappear and go to Gretna Green. Just as the young lady was about to enter the carriage, she had managed to get out the house, the maid of scare house, and the dogs began to bark. And the family was aroused in time to stop the two going off. So she wasn't able to leave with a person that she very much loved, who didn't have a towel on his head. The harpist had to take flight, and Miss Williams was sent to a room. Go to your room, where she was compelled to remain until she married somebody else. Again, she was being forced to marry somebody she didn't love, which is a terrible thing indeed, isn't it, Amy?
Mm-hmm.
3 years later, the harpist was at Swansea, where he played to the soldiers who were stationed in the town. And at this point, the Maid of Scare had actually married somebody else, a certain Mr. Kirkhouse of Neath. She had been forced to marry him. So this is now 3 years later. The man that she loved very, very dearly was playing the harp in Swansea. And she heard the harpist. And that very day that she had heard the harpist, he had actually written some music for her, you know? He had actually written some harp music for her. And guess what she named it? Guess what he named it? He named the music The Maid of Scare. And hopefully nobody knew it was her. And then she sent a letter to him, and she said, "Oh, please, can you actually play it for me and my husband?" And what happened was her husband found out that the maid was in love with the harpist. And sadly, she went home to Neath. She was not able to see him again. And she died of a broken heart. Interesting enough, the harpist died to the ripe old age of 87 years old. But again, we have lots of stories of people's hearts that are broken. And it's said that she also haunts the landscape of the House of Scare. So if you ever see the maid out there wandering the landscape, just go up to her and maybe have a nice conversation with her. We always say have a nice conversation with a ghost. And maybe she was reunited with the harpist when she died, but that bit of the story we shall never know. What I'd like to do, Amy, let's have another little bit of a story from you. Go for it. Remember, go close to the mic. And Amy, are you still able to hear us? Have we lost Amy? Amy, are you there? Oh, we've lost Amy. Okay, there she wants to come back in. Amy, we lost you.
I lost connection again.
Right, okay. I was saying, Amy, can we have a little story from you?
Of course. Okay, would you rather go with the haunted coach or the castle inn?
Do you know what? We can both get involved in the haunted ghost and in the haunted coach one, right? I think we can both do that one. And the reason why we can both do that one is because I think it'd be a nice little story. So go for it.
Okay. Right, so this is located in St. David's Church. If you know Maesteg, that's right opposite Asda. It is central Maesteg town. Basically, there's a haunted coach by well, hold on, let me start again.
Go for it.
There's a coach there that has no driver. Apparently, this apparition is a black coach and a black horses. And these horses that are pulling the coach have eyes like flames coming out of their skulls.
We like that one.
Yes.
Basically, you see the skull and you got the flames. You know,
Yes.
it's yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I've never heard anybody else talk about this. Well, I do know a lot of people here, but people who are interested in ghost stories and stuff such, I've never heard of this before. I researched this. But apparently it was in the driveway of the church, which I'm not sure where the original driveway is, because of course there's new buildings and locations there now. And it's always busy there. But you know, if you do see a coach in the middle of Maesteg, it will be unusual. But
I think it would be. So can we have a little bit more of a description about this sort of coach then?
yeah, think of the Victorian hearse coaches.
Quite scary. All black, maybe a few feathers sticking up, a bit like
Yeah, you never know. A few feathers sticking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, but yeah, it's driverless and horses with flaming eyes, and I'm not sure if they blow fire as well. You know, they could if they're that demonic. But
I think the flames is quite enough. You know, that's just
yeah,
exactly.
the horse blowing flames.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Go for it.
yeah. But yeah, I've never heard of anybody seeing it. Maybe the apparition has disappeared because we know a lot of stories where the apparition is no longer anymore.
Okay.
Perhaps because, of course, the town has been moved. You've got the post office there now. There's a community centre right by the church.
Carry on. Are you still there?
So there's probably a lot of things to do. Yeah, I'm here.
All right. It just broke up a little bit then.
Yeah, sorry, it's my signal.
Okay, not a problem. So I think the one thing with our landscape in Wales is that again you've just done it. You've fallen into the trap. You've actually mentioned horses.
Yes.
So there's this you know, Mary Lloyd. There's the coach and the horses. There's a sense of the headless horseman.
Yes.
There's that wonderful story at Maesteg where we not Maesteg, Merthyr Mawr, where we've got there was a stormy night, and going from the direction of the church along to the grove of beech trees and the arcade of beech trees. We've got that story that one night the horseman and his carriage wished to get over the River Ogmore before it completely floods and the banks burst. And he knows about the Dipping Bridge and he thinks he needs to get over it. And he's riding his horse hard. And he goes down that lane. He goes down over the hill. He goes down to New Inn Road. It's very misty, very sort of whatever. The river, very heavy rain. The river itself has burst its banks. He goes directly over the bridge, and he doesn't realize that the bridge is already submerged in water, and he's washed off that bridge. And he goes down with those horses, and he drowns. He's washed up a few days later, and again it's the horses drowned as well. It's that story of water, horses. You've mentioned it with the coach and horses as well. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to put a little story in of my own actually, and this is very much valleys related. And because I'm struggling being able to see anything at this minute because it's gone dark, I'm just going to turn the light on. So hang on. Now I can read. Are you all with me still?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'd like to do is, anyone got any questions at this moment? No? Okay, good. Oh, we've got one. There's one there. Go on. Dad, have you got a little story? A little question? Little girl there? No, okay. That's Carrie. No, Carrie, I haven't got anything to say. Oh, let's have a word from you, Martin. Go on.
Where in the valleys is your ghost story going to be, Carl?
Oh,
Is it up our neck of the woods?
This has got to be Trebanog.
Oh, just a few miles away.
It's got to be Trebanog.
Just a few miles away.
Exactly. This story was told to me by my grandparents, Avis, and the story is written by Stephen Inkpen. I've never been able to work out whether that's his real name or not, but it is.
Yeah, we know Steve.
You know Steve? Good.
We know Steve.
Well, you know Steve because you met him.
Yeah.
So the story was told to me by my grandparents. This is Stephen. I'm going to be Stephen, right? And his grandparents, Avis and Frederick Williams. Avis was born in 1913, so over 100 years ago. And his granddad, Frederick, who was born in 1910. So this again is the South Wales valleys, the Rhondda Valley. So not the Lindsey Valley, but we're going to go to the Rhondda Valley for a minute. It goes. My grandmother was born in Trebanog, a village south of Pontypridd, at the foot of the Rhondda Valleys, and lived there all her life. Her father, a certain Mr. Frederick Brock, came to Trebanog and built most of the houses in the original village. Trebanog Road, Brock's Terrace, and Danagrind Terrace. He was friends with the old farming families from here and also heard the stories from them. It's a well-known story in Trebanog. So here we go. A long, long time ago, once upon a time, there was a wealthy farmer who lived at Rhugarn Farm in Trebanog. And to get an idea, it overlooks the landscape. So you look up at the hills and you see this farm. It's still there today. The farmer and his wife had no sons and only one daughter. So the farmer decided to find a suitable, respectable husband for his daughter. Being a Banog girl from Trebanog, the daughter did not take kindly to this news and informed her father that he was too late. She had already fallen in love and knew all too well who she was going to marry. So this is the third story now of a girl who's decided who she's going to marry, and her parents and the family in all three stories are not happy with this. Let the girls marry who they want to marry. So the bit of the story is that the father of this Banog girl demanded to know who had stolen her heart, who she'd given her heart to. And it was a bit of an argument. I'm not going to tell you, Dad, it's nothing to do with you. Basically said, well, if you're not going to tell me, right, you're not going to leave this house ever again. But this is slightly different from the other two stories, mind. She basically said to her dad, okay, I'll tell you, Dad, right? But I still want to marry him. I'm going to marry him if you like it or not. And her dad said, well, I'll see about that. Well, as it turned out, she had fallen in love with a farm labourer from one of the small cottages on the other side of the hill, just over the hill there, in the other valley, which isn't a done thing around here, but Martin knows what I'm talking about. However, this was sort of acceptable to the farmer because he thought, well, he lives in a cottage. He must be from farming stock. He's obviously from valley stock. Even though he's from another valley, right? It might be all right. So the girl's father went off to talk to the labourer, leaving her in tears because she thought, my dad's not going to approve of this boy because I know something that my dad doesn't know. He's just a labourer. He hasn't got any money. He's very, very poor. So she said goodbye to her dad, and she was left in tears. Like the other two girls, the maid of Kevin Idva and the maid of Scarehouse. This is a very different story. It ends in a very different way. The two men talked well into the night, and the old family began to like the boy as he was much more intelligent than he'd realized. Back then, you would think that farmer laborers weren't very intelligent, but this was an intelligent farmer's laborer. And the strange thing about this story, all these stories seem to occur in sometime in about the 1700s or thereabout. The great thing about this isn't in Mary Trevilian's book. This is actually in my own book. So, he was more intelligent than he realized. He thought, this is an intelligent lad. Maybe this will be an ideal lad for my daughter to marry. Despite this, however, the boy had no wealth. He was very poor. Although he was a laborer, he had very little experience of running a farm. So basically, he was a general laborer. He might do a bit of work in a mine, or he might do a little bit of here and there and this, but he had no land. He had no real experience of running a farm. So if his daughter was going to marry this boy, right, he needed to be able to run a farm because he was going to give the farm to his daughter. It was their only daughter, after all. In the early hours, it was decided by the father and the labourer that he would leave the area and go off to make his fortune at sea. And then, when he had made his fortune at sea, he would be able to come back, and the father decided that when he'd come back, he could marry his daughter. That's a nice bit of a story, isn't it? It's fine. I wouldn't disagree with that. Is that a nice story so far, Alexia? Come on. Yeah? What do you think, John? It's not going to end well, though, is it? There you go. That morning, the two lovers said farewell, and the farmer's daughter promised that she would ride up onto the mountain every evening to look down at sea and watch for his return. Now, this was at the time that there were no buildings in the way. There was no weird stuff in the landscape, right? And you could see directly out to sea. And there was less trees and so on. It was an agricultural landscape. None of these horrible mines and all the rest of it. Can't say that because the mines built the valleys, but you know what I'm trying to say. Months and months passed by. Every single evening she went up there on her horse. She would ride up the mountain as she promised. And each evening her heart grew heavier as no word came to her about her love. She didn't know where he was. He was somewhere else in the world. One evening in the early autumn, she sat looking at the sea on the distant. She sat looking at the ships on the distant sea, and tears flowed down her cheeks. She looked and looked. She pined for her true love. Her heart was beating, and she watched for too long. She drifted off. Her horse behind her was looking out at sea. And then she woke up. She looked again. And then she realized it was a bit dusky. And it began to get dark. She widened her eyes. She looked, and there was a bit of a mist coming in. And she thought, right, I need to get onto the horse. I need to head home now. And she panicked. And the worst thing you can do in that type of landscape is panic, right? She had not gone far, and the fog got thicker and thicker as it came down the mountain. And in the growing darkness, she became disorientated and soon lost her way. In increasing darkness, A more impenetrable fog. The panic grew, and the panic of the horse grew, and the horse became jittery. The horse slipped on the way down the path and began to become stressed. In its fear, the horse jumped over the rocks into the fog, taking itself over the cliff, and they both fell to their deaths. The girl broke her neck, the horse broke its neck, and both were dead. And you know what's coming, or do you? The lady, from time to time, is seen wandering the mountain, waiting for a lover to return. No one knows if ever he did return or not. The horse can be heard on foggy nights as it clops home along the track to Rugarn Farm. And the wonderful white dress of the lady can be seen flowing in the wind. However, if you're ever up on the top of Trebanog Mountain at dusk time and the fog starts to come down, it's a warning that you will never leave the mountain, because you will go to that part of the cliff and you'll fall over the cliff and join her and be one of the ghosts wandering the mountain forever. And that is the wonderful story of the Lady of the Rock. So what we're going to do now, we're not too far off the end of this tonight. So what I'd like to do is any stories that Amy has got to tell us about Maesteg, she is to do them now. And then we are going to say a little bit more about that landscape. We're going to open the mics and ask any questions. So Amy, the floor is now yours.
Yay! I was thinking, with you mentioning horses about this landscape, phantom funerals.
Yes. Oh, nice. Do you want me to do that one late at the end, just before, or just you do this one? You do your bit, and I will end with my bit, and we'll open questions. Go for it.
No problem. And I just want to say as well, apparently I think it's Sophie's father that has seen a phantom funeral.
And do you know what? When I do the phantom funeral, Sophie, you're going to be dragged in on this one. I'm sorry. Go for it. Go for it, Amy. Go for it.
Okay, so my final story is about the Castle Inn.
Okay. Describe where it is, all the detail, roads, what it's like today. Let's get into the Castle Inn and get there. Go for it.
Okay, again, horses. It was a hotel for coachmen, probably stopping on their way to Swansea. It was, I would say 1800s, obviously, 1700s, 1800s. Of course, this town was a farming community, mining community, but apparently there are more coaches meant to be seen driving into this place. But now, if you know Maesteg again, it's opposite Plas Newydd Primary School, and Zor Place, which is the funeral of rest.
Can I ask you something? Zor Place, is that would that be Zor Chapel originally?
It is part. Zor Place is the road where Zor Chapel is.
Okay, go. Okay.
So around that area, that's where the Castle Inn coach house and hotel was. Apparently, there are coaches and horses seen going that way, and the main story is the landlord killed his wife. The landlord who owned the Castle Inn. And apparently she's said to be seen screaming around that area, a white figure screaming because she was murdered by her husband.
Ah.
Yeah. So apparently in the middle of the night there was screaming heard by guests, and they couldn't put a finger where the screaming came from. Also there were horses being heard, and they were very distressed. So I think he may have murdered a few horses as well as his wife.
You don't hear about horses being murdered, do you? You just hear about people.
Yeah, you do. But the poor horses had it as well.
Oh my God, that is so terrible.
I know.
Anything else you want to say about Maesteg?
Maesteg, not really. It's my home and I love it.
Can you just? I want you to tell us one thing, right? We were meant to have a haunted evening in Maesteg, right?
Yeah.
But everything started to go up the creek because of.
It went a bit pear-shaped, yeah.
But what I want you to do is tell us the journey that you would have made associated with what you would have done that haunted evening night, and then we'll do the phantom funeral with Sophie. Go for it.
Okay, well, I would have started up at Maesteg Cemetery for a meeting point.
Obviously, that's haunted enough.
Well, I'm not sure. I got a lot of relatives buried there, so I want to keep their respect.
Fair enough.
Then I would go up. There's quite a steep hill that goes to the top of the cemetery in the new part of the cemetery, which there goes to a country road. If you follow that road, that takes you up to number 9 Mine and St. John's Colliery.
Excellent.
And I believe it was St. John's that my grandfather worked at. And also I did have a family member who died in the big disaster in St. John's. But I would have taken you up there, taken the equipment up there to see if we could find any ghosts, rituals, everything like that. And then maybe we could have gone, there's a stile there where you could have gone onto the mountain and just gone for a walk up there where there's an abandoned farmhouse, but not all the way to the top because there is quite a way up. And I wouldn't want to be getting lost in the dark. So
yeah, that would have been an interesting one. The one thing that we've got up in that neck of the woods is that we've got the route of the Roman road as it sort of goes across that landscape.
Yeah.
And we've got those ghostly stories of Roman legionaries wandering across the landscape.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is because the route of the road sort of disappears. The actual route of the road towards Nedham Neath sort of disappears, sort of over the Maesteg common type landscape, and maybe seeing those ghostly figures of Roman soldiers would help us work out where the road was. But we've got all those sort of standing stones across that landscape as well, which is another thing. And you've got the Iron Age hill forts up in that way, and all those other wonderful things. So what we're going to do, we're going to do a little bit of a phantom funeral thing now, and I'm going to say, I think it's worked pretty well tonight. I've just got to plug something in a second. So what we'd like to do, Sophie, open your mic.
Hello.
Right now, one of the little stories I tell really associated with Cowbridge, where it's a story more associated with farming landscapes like Maesteg, where what we do find is that back in the day of the likes of St. David, the idea was that people should be warned of when they're going to die. Because if you're going to be warned of when you're going to die, it means that you can go around all your loved ones and actually say, sorry, whatever noise that was then, you can go around all your loved ones and say, actually, I love you, and I've appreciated you in my life. And you could go around people and you could say goodbye to people, and if you've got any possessions, you could say, right, after I die you can have this. And it's St. David thought it would be a nice way of people in Wales to sort of prepare for death, right? So you'd usually be given about 3 weeks to do that. And then across this landscape, and we've got sort of something known as a lledrith, and you've got the floating candles above people's roofs, and all these wonderful things. And then you come in with the likes of then you come in and you've got the likes of the phantom funeral. And usually what happens when you've got the story associated with the phantom funeral. And in one particular instance, this gentleman's wandering down a lane one day, and he sees coming towards him about dusk time a funeral procession, and he's thinking, this is a bit strange. It's 6 o'clock, it's in the evening, and there's a funeral procession coming towards me. And he sees this funeral procession, and he's thinking, hang on a minute, there's people who are very familiar in this funeral procession. And the funeral procession is going down the road, and he looks at the mourners at the back of the funeral procession, and he sees his own wife, and he's thinking, this is a bit strange. And then he sees somebody else in the funeral procession, and it looks like his son, and he's thinking, this is a bit strange. And he sees somebody else who he hasn't seen for years, and he thinks, this is very strange, because I've just had a letter off this person who's going to be visiting at a certain date, which is in 3 weeks' time. And he's thinking, this is a bit strange, right? So anyway, he thinks nothing of this, and he goes home, and the very next day he starts to feel ill. And he then explains to his family, I've just seen this weird thing that it's a funeral procession. And his wife turns around and says to him, actually, do you know the stories of the old Welsh stories? And the husband says, well, what do you mean? You know, the warning that you should prepare for death? And he says, I don't really understand what you're talking about. And the wife said, actually, that was a funeral procession, your own funeral. And he says, I don't get this. I don't get this. And she tells him these stories. Anyway, long story has it that he then prepares for his death. 3 weeks has passed, and lo and behold, the friend that he's got a letter from turns up on the day of his funeral, and he is one of the mourners in the dead man's funeral. And that is the lledrith. That's the warning of your own death. And that's
Right.
repeated in various different villages. I've said all that, Sophie. So what I'd like to do is have your contribution on that. Let's tell us what your dad said, and then we'll open the mics up for questions.
Okay. I don't have many details on it, but I live in Pembrokeshire, so a bit of a way away from you. But when my dad was younger, he used to live in Burton, and I believe it was one day on one of the country roads, he saw a funeral procession that kind of looked Victorian.
Yes.
And after a minute or so, it was just gone. Really.
The weird thing is, he saw a funeral procession. Can I ask a very sensitive subject? Is your dad still with us?
Yeah.
Right, okay. Very sensitive. When did he see this funeral procession?
A few years ago.
That goes against the grain. So strange.
It does.
Yeah, no, it really does. I'm biting my pen thinking, bloody hell, I can't work that one out.
I'll have to ask him again about it and see what he says.
Yeah,
but
strange.
He's still here.
Very strange, very strange. So what I'd like to do, before I open the mics, I'm going to just, if anyone wants a copy of Ghosts of Glamorgan, as we open the mics up now, we can get a copy of this to you, because we'll be sending them out this week. They're £10 if anyone's interested. I'd like to remind everybody that anyone who hasn't paid tonight, I don't know what, we'll have a word with John and Dell about that, but I know everybody else has, so that's that done. Next week, we're going to be looking at the Battle of Cowbridge. Now, I'm going to say this, right? I think having children and adults tonight has really worked. I was going to suggest we have a children's session and an adult session, but I think, Alexia, has this worked tonight? Yeah? I think it's really worked tonight. It's been a really sensible session, right? Next week we know what to do, right? Because Zoom, I'll be sending you a password. So next week it'll be a lot more easier to suss. We're still working with Zoom technology. I think it's really worked. It's been a good flow, and I'm glad Eleanor joined us there as well. So that was really good. What we're going to do, we're going to open all mics. Let's have everybody's mics on. I'm going to ask something of all of you, and then we're going to say goodbye. And we'll do this next week. So we will have another one next week. So what I'm going to do, mics all on. We're going to have questions from Martin's house. Martin, has you or your children got anything they would like to add? Any questions, any stories, anything? Just give it to us.
Well, Carrie's just asking, can she watch you next week?
Carrie can join us next week. That'll be certainly brilliant. And next week will be the Battle of Cowbridge, right? There's lots of death next week. And it's going to be very scary next week. And there's a few ghosts that go bump in the night next week. You'll be very, Carrie, you'll be very welcome to join us next week. Right, John, what about you? Have you enjoyed this week, John? John, I can't hear you. Your mic's off.
Alert from me to John. Why?
Right, John. Okay, nothing from John. We still can't hear you, right? So when we can hear you, right, I will put a finger on the nose and then you can talk, right? We can't hear you yet. Right, Alexia, what have you enjoyed tonight? Anything you want to say?
Yeah, I have enjoyed tonight.
Good.
But I had a question.
Mute. Currently you muted.
Good.
Button.
It's not into your fault. That was my question. My question was, did anything happen to did the horse,
Which one?
did the horse have any further problems? Did it affect anybody?
What do you mean? The horse in which story? The one at the Trebanog Mountain, or?
Both.
Oh, right, right, that's very interesting. You're talking, when a ghost, that's interesting. If a horse is not associated with water, it's not a Keffel Dur horse. It's a very different, thing altogether, because there are different entities out there. So you've got the horse that might die on a common, or the horse that might die associated with Amy's story, and so on. So they're very different horse stories, and you see those horses in a different way. But whenever horses are associated with water, be very careful, Alexia. Hopefully I've answered that question.
But what's the difference between land horses and water horses?
Land horses are horses that have died in association with human beings on natural journeys, and the water horse is more of a spirit horse rather than a ghostly horse. Basically, a spirit horse takes the form of a ghost, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say that it was a horse that ever was a horse. It's a spiritual horse, if that makes any sense. Yeah. Good. Well, actually, do you know, next week we will mention that horses will be mentioned a little bit more next week. So I'm going to take a note of that. Horses more. Right. What about you, Del?
No, that's fine. I've enjoyed it. I knew quite a few of those stories, the Maid of Cefnydfer and the Maid of Sker. So
Yeah.
I've heard about those before.
But you obviously got a bit more meat on the bones.
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
Good. What about you, Goff? Have you enjoyed it tonight?
Sorry? Goff?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Very interesting. Very good. Yeah.
Are you joining us
very
next week?
interesting. Yes, I expect so, yeah.
Brilliant. I won't have another session for children because I think this has been really worked well. It's really fed well. I didn't expect it would, but it has. Right, Sophie, what about you? Anything you want to say?
I haven't got any questions, but I've enjoyed it, and I'll probably come back next week.
Fabulous. What about you, Eleanor? It's I haven't seen you for ages, but have you enjoyed it tonight, Eleanor?
Yes, fine. I thought it was going to be on Cowbridge, but perhaps I look forward to that next week.
Cowbridge is next week, and it's going to be yes.
My daughter has mentioned some boy in the bear. I don't know if you know the story.
The boy in the bear. Well, next week, what we're going to do, it'll be focused on the Battle of the Battle of Cowbridge, but there will naturally be ghost stories from Cowbridge in it as well. So that's
there is a boy. Apparently, something bad happened in one of the rooms, which used to be a bedroom, and because of the disastrous things that went on, they changed the room from a bedroom into a meeting room.
I think that's even worse, to be honest. But particularly if somebody else joins the meeting,
yes,
you know what I mean?
Something happened to somebody who slept in that bedroom, and okay. I think, yeah.
I will add that in when next week. And John, you're the last but not least. John, can we hear you? Nope. I'm going to try and unmute him. We can't hear you, John. John, we can't hear you at all. I don't know what's gone wrong, but we can't hear you, John. So what I'll do, I'll give John a ring a little bit later anyway, so that'll be good. So what we're going to do, I will be seeing Evan on. I'll be seeing Evan on Wednesday for the archaeology class. I will be seeing Goff on Thursday. I'll be seeing John on Tuesday for the archaeology classes. We do have archaeology classes that go on in through the week. If anyone wants to ask anything about them or anyone wants the book, they need to ask now. And then in a short while, we will close everything down tonight. Anyone else want to say anything else about? Say it now.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Dad.
Alert from me to John. Speak.
Dad's gonna come to next week, I think.
That'll be good. Dad'll be good. It'll be good to see Dad. Be good. Right. So as there's no more questions, I look forward to. So what I need is a quick word with Del, and I'm going to phone John because I can't hear him. So if there's no more questions, I'll keep Amy to the end. So we'll turn off the mics in this order. In about 30 seconds, we'll have Martin first, then Alexia next, Sophie, Goff, Eleanor. I'll keep Del, Amy, and John. So what I'm going to do, I'm glad you've all enjoyed this tonight. Really appreciate your support on this. So thank you very much. So I'm going to say goodnight to everybody now. So if there's no more questions, good night, everyone. And those that I've said stay on, Del, Amy, and John, please do so. If you want to turn off in that order. Thank you very much. Night, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Nice to see you, John. Take care, John.
Sign you now.
Night.
Bye.
Night, Goff. Night, John. Night, Martin. Good to have you on, Martin. Eleanor as well. That's great.
Night, Jim boy.
And good to have Sophie.
Night, Jim boy.
Night, John Bob. Oh, that was good to have Eleanor along as well. So, Del, so you enjoyed that tonight, Eleanor? Del, yeah? Del?
Yes. Baker Charlie Dog. I'm a big fat chocolate frog.
Oh, we got John on. John, right. So, Del, did you manage to sort out the shekels tonight?
Not yet. I'm going to log on to the Archaeology Cymru and do it via that, if that's okay.
Log on to, Archaeology Cymru Ghosts.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And if you wanted to join for next week, you may as well kill two birds with one stone.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, if there's anything else you want to ask Del? Oh, is that everything?
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
Del, hopefully I'll see you on Thursday as well.
See you Thursday.
Night, Del.
Okay,
bye-bye.
Night, stay stiff.
Oh, we will.
Yes.
I like that one.
I'm a big fat chocolate frog.
Right, John, I don't know what happened to you tonight, but John, was that good tonight?
Ah, that worked.
I think I think Alexia really did. She really liked it tonight, so that was good.
Yeah, it went as good as last week though, Carl, because there was a bit of history in there, which Alexia liked and I liked, and a little bit of archaeology, and it was all a bit ghosty tonight. I felt,
but they did enjoy it, John. That's the main thing. So
well, yeah, I mean it's for kids, isn't it? At the end of the day, I suppose. But maybe I'm being a little selfish.
You are being, John, because next week you're going to get more blood and all. So shut up. So right, John. What I'm going to say. Have you? I don't know if you thought about anything I said earlier on.
Well, I can't predict whoever's going to turn up from my nest. As you saw, David wasn't there tonight.
Okay.
And it was only, I think, thanks to a 10-year-old's ingenuity with computers that she actually managed to get there, because her mother, I don't think, helped. Father was on the razzle with his friend. And it's only because she's allowed to have WhatsApp that we managed to make it possible. I did try hard.
John,
it's Alexia on there.
It's fine. It's fine. You did well. Look. Okay. Well. So we can, if you anything you want to ask about anything, we can do that on Tuesday. So that'll be good. So yeah.
But I printed off what you sent me in that email.
Yeah.
And it really don't tell me a fat lot, really.
What?
No, it doesn't.
What the one on the last week's lecture?
No.
Oh, the letter. Oh, right. Okay.
29th of March.
What I'll do, John. What I'll do, I'll give you a call. I'll give you a call tomorrow. All right.
All right then.
Okay. We'll have
the information there was negligible, really.
Okay. Yeah. Look. We'll have a chat about that tomorrow, John. So.
Not that it worries me. I'm quite happy to carry on as we are and have been for the last 2-3 years, or more than that, probably.
I know, John. It's fine. Right. I'm gonna have to dash in a second because I've got to speak to my daughter. So John, don't forget the shekels tonight, okay?
Have I ever?
No, you've never done. So,
right. Okay.
Right, we'll have a chat tomorrow. And John, you've been on best behaviour. I'll see you soon.
All right then. Ta-ra.
Night.
Bye.
Right. Night, John. And Amy, I'm gonna have to dash in a second. Anything you want to ask before I go?
Yes, you said about the horse spirits and everything.
Yes.
Whenever you mention Ceffyl Dŵr, I always think of the Kelpie, which is Scottish. I don't know if you would include that. I know it's different, but
well, we'll have a go next week.
Okay, because Kelpies I always think of them when you message them. It's just they don't have their stories is not as good, I don't think, as Ceffyl Dŵr. But it's like if you go to stroke the horse, you get stuck to it and it drags you into the water.
Very similar. What I will do the full Ceffyl Dŵr story next week.
Okay. And I still, if you get time in the week, please, can I have that footage of that night?
Oh, right. Yes. Okay. I will try. Yes.
Okay. I think that's everything. We got the Battle of Tower Bridge next week. Would it be okay to mention what happened during our walk last time we were there?
That's what I want. Yes.
Okay.
But obviously don't go overboard because of the children. Okay.
No, of course not.
Okay. Well, we'll sort that out. If you haven't got anything else, I'll dash.
Yeah. Okay. You go speak to your daughter then.
Okay then. Night, Amy.
Night. Have a good week.
I shall. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Night.
You've come on.
Have I?
I will leave now.